order. I thank you all for being here this morning. And our full committee hearing is on U.S. defense posture changes in the European theater. We have two witnesses this morning. Helpfully, both here and present, Dr. James Anderson, who is the Acting Undersecretary of Defense for Policy for the Department of Defense, and Lieutenant General David Allvin, Director for Strategy, Plans, and Policy with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sorry, I got to unfog my glasses there for a second. I'd like to welcome members who are joining today's markup remotely. Those members are reminded that they must be visible on screen within the software platform for the purposes of identity verification when joining the proceedings, establishing and maintaining a quorum, participating in the proceeding, and voting. Members participating remotely must continue to use the software platform's video function while attending the proceedings unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. If a member who is participating remotely experiences technical difficulties, please contact the committee staff for assistance and they will help you get reconnected. When recognized, video of remotely attending members' participation will be broadcast in the room and via the television/internet feeds. Members participating remotely are asked to mute their microphone when they are not speaking. Members participating remotely will be recognized normally for asking questions, but if they want to speak at another time, they must seek recognition verbally. In all cases, members are reminded to unmute their microphone prior to speaking. Members should be aware that there is a slight lag of a few seconds between the time you start speaking and the camera shot switching to you. Members who are participating remotely are reminded to keep the software platform video function on for the entirety of the time they attend the proceeding. These members may leave and rejoin the proceeding. If members depart for a short period for reasons other than joining a different proceeding, they should leave the video function on. If members will be absent for a significant period or depart to join a different proceeding, they should exit the software platform entirely and then rejoin it when they return. Members are also advised that I have designated a committee staff member to, if necessary, mute unrecognized members' microphones to cancel any inadvertent background noise that may disrupt the proceedings. Members may use the software platform's chat feature to communicate with staff regarding technical or logistical support issues only. Finally, remotely participating members should see a 5-minute countdown clock on the software platform's display, but if necessary, I will remind members when their time is up. Only additional note that I would make on that is, as you are asking questions, and even for the witnesses, when you're not actually speaking, it's helpful to turn the microphone off, because believe it or not, the microphone on, it creates feedback up there. It gets confusing, because then you got to go on and off and on and off. But if you can do that, it is helpful. Well, I thank the witnesses for being here today and the members for being present. I think this is a very important discussion. As we've heard a little while back, an announcement was made as a change in our defense posture within Europe. And I want to make clear at the outset that I think it is always appropriate to re-examine our posture around the world. This is a rapidly changing world. The threat environment is dynamic, and our assets and allies are also reasonably dynamic. There are opportunities to be found in looking at ways that we can better distribute our assets and our forces to meet those challenges. But I was concerned about the way this particular change in our posture was announced and is proposed to be implemented within Europe. There was an announcement basically of a need to reduce the troops in Germany by 12,000. That number did not seem to be tied to any particular requirement. And then in addition to that, there was the requirement that we get rid of all of our headquarters in Germany. The reasons for that were far from clear, so the number seemed to be artificial. Certainly, as we look at our needs in Europe and as we build and strengthen alliances with the relatively new Eastern European partners within NATO, there are clearly opportunities to build on those partnerships and potentially station U.S. troops in those Eastern European countries to improve our posture and better meet our defense needs, particularly with regards to deterring Russian aggression in that part of the world. I don't think this plan was particularly well thought out, and I'm worried about a number of aspects of its implementation. The biggest one being the artificial number pulling troops out of Germany. You know, where did that number come from? And in particular, when we were briefed, and a few of us on the committee were briefed a month or so ago about this, the decision to move AFRICOM out of Germany, which does not seem to make any sense. It's not that we couldn't have originally picked a better place in Europe, or a different place in Europe at any rate. But having picked Germany and had AFRICOM there for the entirety of the command, the reasons for moving it don't seem to make sense, except, as came out in the briefing, it was necessary to get to the 12,000 number. That is not the way we should be making policy, and it's going to be very, very expensive. Now, on the European command decision, we do have the presence in Mons, Belgium that we've always had with SHAPE, and there an argument can potentially be made. But nonetheless, it's very expensive to move these command structures, and what does it truly net us? The second aspect of this, as you are aware, some of the forces that are being moved are, in a sense, being moved back to the U.S., and they are becoming rotational. That has an impact, certainly on the members serving, but also on our presence in those countries and on our ability to respond. Now, we have dramatically reduced the number of troops that we have in the European theater. I think at the height of the Cold War in the mid-'80s, there was somewhere around 350,000 U.S. troops stationed in Europe. And in the current environment, having 350,000 U.S. troops in Europe would not make any sense whatsoever. But we've reduced that number down, if I'm correct, to, I think, roughly 62,000. So we have made that response. But if we then take some number of them and turn them into rotational troops, what does that do to our ability to meet our national security objectives in that part of the world? Because Russia is becoming more aggressive, not less. I think that is something that there is bipartisan consensus on. Certainly their efforts in Ukraine have been very aggressive. Their efforts to disrupt democracy in any way that they can in Europe and the U.S. and elsewhere have grown. So I think our need to have a deterrence there is enormously important. And, you know, I also am concerned about the effect it has on our partnerships in Europe, because we definitely need friends and allies more than ever. And I feel very strongly that, as I think every member of this committee does, that the NATO alliance has served our country very well. And when we make these types of arbitrary decisions without working closely with our partners, that undermines that alliance. Even if in every partnership and every alliance, difficult things have to be done that maybe the partners won't like, but there's a way to do that. I do not, for instance, disagree at all that we should try to do everything we can to get our European partners to contribute more to the defense of Europe. I think that is appropriate. But if we do things to undermine the alliance in what appears to be a gratuitous way, without working with them, without listening to them, it undermines the strength of that alliance and plays right into Russia's hands. Because number one at the top of the list of the things that Russia wants to accomplish, reducing the power, cohesion, and strength of Western democracies is right at the top. They want to see us divided. They want to see NATO weakened. They want to see the NATO partners disagreeing and at each other's throats. We should not play into their hands. We should work with our European partners as we put these plans in place. So it certainly makes sense to always have a conversation about what our posture should be in Europe. I think that the committee, in a bipartisan way, has deep concerns about the way this was done, the way it's going to be implemented, and how it's going to impact the NATO alliance, our alliances in Europe in general, and our defense posture in Europe specifically. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and look forward to the Q&A to get greater detail on how those decisions were made going forward. With that, I yield to the ranking member, Mr. Thornberry, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate having this hearing on this topic. I agree that it is important, and in addition, there are provisions in the current conference with the Senate on this year's NDAA which touch on these issues. And there are a lot of questions, as you point out, and I fully agree that many of these questions arise from the way that this announcement was made and has subsequently been rolled out. I realize that the witnesses today are not going to be able to answer all of our questions about when or how much, but hopefully they can help clarify for us and the American people what and especially why. Some of these moves seem to make sense on their face. For example, moving EUCOM to be closer to NATO headquarters, having a greater presence in the Balkans. But there needs to be an overall strategic plan that is coordinated with allies rather than have a bunch of rationalizations after the fact. I fully agree that NATO is the most successful alliance in history. Can it be improved? Absolutely. But we can't lose sight of what it has accomplished and what it means today for American national security. And so, however logical some of these individual moves may be, there's still the broader question of doing this in this way has some effects on the strength and unity of the NATO alliance. And what is that? And so I hope our witnesses can shed a little light on the consultations, on how this all fits together in the bigger picture, because it does seem to me, however much or less sense individual moves may make, the main thing is the strength of NATO, especially when dealing with an aggressive Russia. That's the main thing, and we need to have that in mind as we go through these details as well. I yield back.
Thank you. And with that, I yield to Dr. Anderson for his opening statement.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Thornberry, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to testify on recent European force structure posture realignment alongside Lieutenant General David Allvin. He is a great partner, and it is an honor to appear beside him. The department continues to prioritize implementation of the National Defense Strategy, NDS, including the building of a more lethal force and strengthening alliances. One important initiative to advance the NDS and to ensure a focus on these priorities is the ongoing comprehensive review of all combatant commands. As part of U.S. European Command, U.S. EUCOM review, Secretary Esper directed EUCOM to develop options for reposturing our Europe-based forces to compete more effectively and respond to contingencies both within Europe and globally. These options will be guided by Secretary Esper's 5 core principles. 1, enhancing deterrence of Russia. 2, strengthening NATO. 3, reassuring allies. 4, improving U.S. strategic flexibility and EUCOM's operational flexibility. And most importantly, 5, taking care of our service members and their families. On July 29, Secretary Esper announced an update to the status of our U.S. European Command Force Posture Review following a decision by the President in early June to limit the number of assigned active duty service members in Germany to 25,000, as well as the DOD concept to reposition some of our forces within Europe and back to the United States to be better situated for great power competition. The review yielded a concept for nearly 12,000 military personnel to be repositioned from Germany, with almost 5,600 restationed in other NATO countries and approximately 6,400 returning to the United States. The realignment concept includes consolidating headquarters to strengthen operational agility, repositioning some forces in the United States to focus on readiness and to prepare for rotational deployments, and deploying rotational forces to the Black Sea region on NATO's southeastern flank to improve deterrence. The concept consists of the following 4 pillars.
Thank you.
First, the consolidation of various U.S. headquarters in Europe outside Germany, including in some cases co-locating headquarters at the same locations as their NATO counterparts in Belgium and Italy. This would help strengthen NATO and improve operational efficiency and readiness of more than 2,000 service members in these headquarters. Second, the nearly 4,500 members of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment would return to the United States as other Stryker units begin rotations farther east in the Black Sea region, giving us a more enduring presence to enhance deterrence and reassure allies along NATO's southeastern flank. Third, 2,500 airmen based at the Royal Air Force Base in Mildenhall, United Kingdom, who are responsible for aerial refueling and special operations, and who had been scheduled to rebase to Germany, would remain in the UK, thus ensuring uninterrupted readiness and responsiveness of these units. Fourth, a fighter squadron and elements of a fighter wing would be repositioned to Italy, moving them closer to the Black Sea region and rendering them more capable to conduct dynamic force employment and rotational deployments to NATO's southeastern flank. This concept to reposition our forces in Europe constitutes a major strategic shift, wholly in line with the NDS and consistent with other adjustments the U.S. has previously made within NATO. Over NATO's 71-year history, the size, composition, and disposition of U.S. forces in Europe has changed many times. As our planning for the current realignment matures, we will be sure to communicate frequently with Congress and with our NATO allies to maintain visibility and foster cooperation. As we continue to implement the NDS, our efforts at enhancing our European posture beyond the EUCOM Combatant Command Review have shown recent successes, including the signing of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with Poland in August that will enable an increased enduring U.S. rotational presence in that country of about 1,000 U.S. military personnel. These elements are in addition to the 4,500 U.S. military personnel already on rotation in Poland and includes infrastructure and logistical support provided by Poland. Our continued efforts to streamline operations across Europe, including through modernized and new agreements with NATO allies, especially on the eastern flank, directly support our NDS principles by improving operational flexibility and enhancing deterrence. The Department is confident that these continuing efforts will help us adapt the force and optimize our force posture in Europe as we seek to deter malign actors. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. General Allvin.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Thornberry, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here to be with you today. As Dr. Anderson noted, the Joint Staff partners closely with our OSD and U.S. European Command, or EUCOM, colleagues to provide credible military options to the Secretary of Defense and the President on U.S. military presence in Europe in support of national security objectives. The 2018 National Defense Strategy describes the erosion in longstanding rules-based international order, which has created an increasingly complex and volatile global security environment. Russian aggression and malign influence is accelerating this decline in Europe, with cascading effects across the globe. As General Walters, the commander of U.S. EUCOM, stated in testimony earlier this year, over the past 12 years, Russia has invaded 2 neighboring states, violated the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, leading to the treaty's termination, developed new strategic platforms, and abrogated its responsibilities under the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe. This has been done at the expense of strategic stability. It is because serious threats from Russia and China that this January of 2020, Secretary Esper directed a series of combatant command reviews to focus on strategic priorities across the globe and realign forces in support of the National Defense Strategy. Of particular relevance to Europe, the NDS calls for the Joint Force to maintain a favorable balance of power in Europe, deter adversaries from aggression against our vital interests, and defend allies from military aggression while bolstering partners against coercion. These objectives are accomplished through the 3 distinct lines of effort: building a more lethal joint force, strengthening alliances, and reforming the Department's business practices. But technological and geopolitical influence on the character of war necessitates the evolution in not only the tools with which we fight, but the operational concepts and the general posture of our forces. In many ways, those concepts of U.S. forces in Europe have not markedly changed since the last huge force reduction following the fall of the Berlin Wall, as well as subsequent changes since. Large formations of permanent forces can present vulnerabilities and are not best suited to flexibly respond to emergent threats across the globe and outside of their current area of operations. The current environment requires increased strategic flexibility and freedom of action. The National Defense Strategy unveiled the concept of dynamic force employment, which prioritizes maintaining the readiness of the joint force for major combat while providing options for proactive and scalable employment for deterrence and assurance. This concept is critical to EUCOM posture, the EUCOM posture realignment. Under the dynamic force employment concept, episodic introduction of forces across the region presents dilemmas to potential adversaries while providing the Secretary and the President with the flexibility and capacity to rapidly respond to emergent threats across the globe. Operational flexibility is equally important. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the ideological border separating East from West has gradually shifted in favor of a free and open international order. New allies are joining NATO, but these gains must be reinforced. Nations along the Black Sea and Baltic Sea, for instance, are under direct and persistent military pressure from Russia. Presenting forces further east will reduce the response time and increase the deterrence to Russian aggression. Moving forces in and out of the European theater, as is done with rotational forces, also exercises the joint reception, staging, onward movement, and integration capabilities, which must be sharp to support ongoing contingency plans in the region. None of this is possible without allies and partners. And over the past 75 years, the U.S. has benefited from a growing constellation of alliances and partnerships. These bilateral and multilateral accords, with the North Atlantic Treaty as a shining example, serve as a strategic and asymmetric advantage against revisionist powers such as Russia. The transatlantic alliance is strengthened by the complementary capabilities, unique perspectives, relationships, and regional access provided by our NATO allies. Collaborative planning is necessary to coalesce these diverse viewpoints and competencies into an interoperable force which acts together to achieve common military objectives. Co-location of the NATO headquarters with the EUCOM headquarters will enhance the NATO collaborative planning with the EUCOM staff and build upon recent enhancements to the NATO command structure. During Secretary Esper's 29 July briefing, he affirmed that the realignment of U.S. forces in Europe plan is subject to and likely will change to some degree as it evolves over time. In his role as the global integrator, Chairman Milley continues to capture the views of the combatant commanders and the Joint Chiefs so that he may provide military advice to the Secretary and President on updates and refinements to the plan to address the strategic and operational threats at the speed of relevance. We also acknowledge that the best plans are born through consultation with allies and continued engagement with Congress. We are committed to this collaborative approach. During the 29 July brief, the Vice Chairman, General Hyten, mentioned the department's structure process required to translate this concept into action. I would like to offer some additional insight into the process and provide a bit of a roadmap going forward. The realignment of forces outside of U.S. territory requires structured engagements between the Department of Defense, the interagency, allied host nations, and international organizations, in addition to this body. These engagements generally involve a three-part process: planning, approvals, and implementation. Timelines for completion depend on the complexity, scale, and scope of the proposed change. The planning stage has already begun as the EUCOM commander continues to iterate the posture concept with stakeholders across the department and will provide updates and considerations to the Secretary in the weeks and months to come. As the plan matures, the department's Global Posture Executive Council, called the GPEC, co-chaired by the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Capabilities and the Director of the Joint Staff, will support this effort through a deliberative, comprehensive process. This includes developing the requirements for manpower, infrastructure, and agreements in order to inform budgetary estimates. The services will determine whether the capacity exists to support the additional forces, along with the funding requirements for the military construction, if applicable, of operational and support facilities, which they will request from Congress. These facilities can range from increases in apron parking spaces for an arriving squadron to new barracks, family housing, school, or medical facilities. The services must also evaluate support for service members and their families residing in and around the installation, such as morale and welfare programs, family service support, DOD schools, and childcare. If an installation is expanded or closed, the services must account for impacts to our U.S. and host nation civilian workforce. The planning stage also involves early host nation consultation. Building infrastructure requires adherence to U.S. and host nation environmental regulatory requirements, as well as negotiations with the host nation on utilities, airspace management, and historical site mitigations, for example. Simultaneously, planning is necessary for divestment of installations being closed. The approval stage...
Sorry, John, if you could wrap up. We do want to get to members' questions here.
Yes, sir. Finally, we must remember that our most precious resources are military men and women and their families. Any realignment will have an impact on our people, which is why Secretary Esper and Chairman Milley are committed to ensuring the needs of our service members and their families are paramount as we execute this realignment. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you very much. Dr. Anderson, could you explain the pros and cons balance between permanent forces and rotational forces? That seems to be one of the biggest changes on the posture side that was contained in this, was to shift more towards rotational forces.
Yes, the basic advantage of rotational forces is they provide additional flexibility. And they do so both at the strategic level, which is important for the President and the Secretary, and also at the operational level, which is important to the EUCOM combatant commander. That is the main advantage of rotational forces.
Two questions about that. One, what are the downside? And two, flexibility to do what? Flexibility sounds like a nice word, but it doesn't actually tell us anything. So what flexibility to do what, and then what are the downsides of the forces being rotational instead of fully present?
So I don't see any downsides to being rotational, but there is a cost involved in transitioning from permanent forces to rotational.
Well, I guess I would ask, if there are no downsides to being rotational forces, why do we have any permanent forces?
So there are certain air bases and hubs and logistical facilities that do need to be permanent. There is virtue there as we are able to move forces and flow forces to various contingencies around the world. So saying that there's benefits to rotational forces doesn't mean there's still some value in certain cases to permanent forces. And as to your other question on flexibility to do what, it's the flexibility to meet those emerging or emergent crises or conflicts which may arise, and the flexibility to take different forces and move them to different regions of the world or move them within the European theater provides advantages, and it complicates adversary decision making, and that is a good thing.
Okay. Mr. Thornberry.
Dr. Anderson, you used the word concept several times, and frankly, I'm confused or not clear about where this stands. Have we given an outline of moves that we will make and now we're working through the details, or is this a concept in a sense that if our allies say we don't like that, we could abandon it?
So we have outlined to our allies, our NATO allies, the moves as we've described here, and I describe it as a concept with planning underway, because there's a great deal of that to be done going forward. As you know, sir, the department has very structured processes to plan, and receiving the Secretary's guidance and the President's direction, we are proceeding along those lines. Now, I would also add that, as with any major plan, it is subject to revisions and modifications going forward. But that's how I would describe it. And as I said in my opening statement, we commit to continuing to consult with Congress going forward.
You mentioned several times in your opening statement, well, actually you both did, the National Defense Strategy. I brought the summary with me. There's a whole section, as you will recall, about strengthening alliances and attracting partners. There's a section on upholding the foundation of mutual respect, responsibility, and priorities, expanding consultative mechanisms, and so forth. Are you aware of any consultation with allies that was made before the roughly June 2020 announcement that we were going to remove troops from Germany?
So prior to the public rollout, we did speak with our NATO allies. I personally reached out to my counterparts, and I know my uniformed colleagues as well.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the public rollout. Is this Secretary Esper's description of the specific moves?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so my question was, back in June, the National Security Advisor had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. There were at least leaks before that. Were there consultations, to your knowledge, before that announcement or op-ed were made?
So I was not involved in those consultations, but I do know that Secretary Esper did task combatant commander earlier this year, very early in the year, to begin some planning for force posture adjustments. I believe that in that context, it's a fair assumption that there were some discussions with close allies about different possibilities.
Well, I've met with several of either ambassadors or defense ministers, and my sense is this caught them all by surprise. Let me just ask one other question. Would you agree that the extent to which there is a chaos, disunity within NATO actually is of assistance to the Russians?
So I would respectfully disagree with the characterization of chaos.
No, I'm not saying this creates chaos. I'm just trying to get back to my fundamental point that the unity and strength of NATO is of paramount importance when it comes to deterring Russia.
And on that point, I would agree wholeheartedly. Yes, sir.
We can agree. We may not agree, or I don't know, about whether individual actions may cause chaos. But my main question I wanted is that unity of NATO is an important deterrence.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Langevin is recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Langevin is participating remotely, so we'll give him a second to queue up. Jim, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today to discuss the need to maintain our defense posture in Europe. And I'm sure we can all agree our greatest strength in deterring Russian aggression is our allies. So my question, let me begin with this. A realignment plan, and certainly in my view and that of many others, should fix something that isn't working. Dr. Anderson, what problems currently exist that necessitates such a costly, large-scale realignment? And additionally, how do you assess our existing allies, such as Germany, will view this plan?
I'm sorry, could somebody repeat that question? I couldn't quite hear it.
Yeah, I'll try it again.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
Can you hear me better now if I speak up?
We hear you fine, as near as I can tell. Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay. I asked, a realignment plan should fix something that isn't working. And so, Dr. Anderson, I wanted to ask what problem currently exists that necessitates such a costly, large-scale realignment. Additionally, how do you assess our existing allies, such as Germany, with this plan?
The basic question is, what wasn't working, what were you trying to fix, and how do you think Germany feels about this?
Thank you. So, as as mentioned and discussed earlier, we look at posture on a routine basis, how we're doing around the world, and certainly in the context of the Secretary of Defense directed combatant command reviews. This is, and by the way, which is wasn't just focused on EUCOM, but is an across-the-board review of all our combatant commands. We looked at how well our current posture is deterring our competitors, and we looked at how efficient our disposition of troops is, and in that context, we have come up with a plan going forward to enhance that posture and to align with the 5 principles articulated by Secretary Esper. So, in the case of Germany, they probably they have some different ideas perhaps about what would be the ideal posture, but these are our forces. at the invitation of Germany, and I would argue that change can be hard because change is different, but we're quite confident that these changes will in fact be beneficial not only to the United States but all our NATO allies. I would also note, in the broader context of European NATO history, there have been multiple changes over time in terms of our force posture in
Okay,
that country.
I'm gonna stop you there if I could. My time is running down. I have to be honest with you that I'm really having I'm in trouble connecting the dots where this is fixing a problem that really I don't think exists right now. In fact, I think it's going to cause more problems than anything it's going to solve. But let me turn to this. Our approach to deterrence obviously has to be a whole of government approach, not solely reliant on the DOD. When deciding these realignment plans, what role does and did the State Department play, and what inputs have they provided during this process? And I think the ranking member touched on this, but I think it's important to address and expand upon it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What role did could somebody summarize the question? I'm having a hard time hearing.
The State Department. What role do they have in this, and what inputs do they have in the process?
So I know that I talk to my State Department colleagues all the time, and I know that Secretary Esper talks with Secretary Pompeo. And prior to the rollout, we did discuss this posture realignment with our friends across the river.
Okay, it doesn't sound like it sounded to me then it was ad hoc as opposed to a well thought out State Department process and involvement. So with that, I know my time's running down, so I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for being here today to bring us up to date on the European theater. I'm particularly grateful that President Trump has expanded the troop presence in Poland. This is a deterrence to Putin aggression, and it's special to me. I have a Polish-American daughter-in-law, and so the recognition of how important that country is to all of us, and has been. And then I had the opportunity to meet with President Andrzej Duda in New York and thank him for the warm welcome of American troops. In fact, there's been speculation that the base could be called Fort Trump. The key point is that we really appreciate and recognize the importance of Poland to deter aggression. And Secretary Anderson, I was an election observer in Bulgaria in 1990 for the parliamentary elections, which represented the historic transition to a democratic society, a dream come true of democracy in Bulgaria. I visited our base there in Novo Selo in 2008 at its meager beginning, and now it's a world-class training facility which has been really reinforced by Prime Minister Boyko Borisov. Additionally, I visited MK Air Base in Romania with Congresswoman Madeleine Baidaio when it was established as a logistics hub for the global war on terrorism, but it's now modernized to be the heel-to-toe rotations for armored brigade combat teams in Europe. What is your assessment of our relationship with NATO allies, Bulgaria and Romania, including the strategic locations of Novo Selo and MK for the European Defense Initiative?
So first on Poland, we certainly agree they're a strong NATO ally, and we believe the enhanced defense cooperation agreement is going to make that partnership even stronger with our additional rotational forces there. With the both Bulgaria and Romania are relatively new to NATO, having joined in 2004 with other countries, but they have made tremendous strides, as your question suggests, in terms of modernization and professionalization. So we absolutely are looking to them as we reposition and move additional rotational forces through those two countries. We think that this will strengthen deterrence along NATO's southeastern flank in a very positive way, and so we're excited about this possibility.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Secretary, there's always going to be tensions between commitments that we have in other areas of the world. such as the Indo-PACOM region, recognizing the importance now of the alliance that we have with India and how far that's come, the American security commitments to EUCOM, though obviously we need to maintain, and how do we do this to be committed to our European allies, to our Asian allies? What is the latest on the strategic gains of our military over the last year with our partners and allies in Europe? How can we better prepare America and our strategic allies to deter adversaries?
So in the context of great power competition, which we outline in the National Defense Strategy, we are very concerned, obviously, about our competitors, both the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation. The United States is a European power. It's also a Pacific power. We can and we are and we will continue to have commitments in both regions and deter on both those fronts. I would add that the rotational element of this current plan here gives us more flexibility, both, again, at the strategic level and at the operational level. So what that means in very practical terms is that some of the troops currently positioned in Europe that will be coming back to the United States and then will have the inherent flexibility to respond to any number of global contingencies, but they will still retain a keen focus on deploying back to Europe on a rotational basis.
Excellent. Thank you. And General Allvin, there's no doubt that China and Russia are our main competitors, and they continue malign activity in Africa. What is the Security Force Assistant Brigade's support for AFRICOM?
And I do apologize, but you got about 15 seconds to answer that question. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I would say this is one of the great developments that the United States Army has done to be able to adapt to the environment and understand it's not all about high-end combat, but sometimes you have to compete, and those mill-to-mill cooperation arrangements that the SFAB really primes on is important to be able to compete across the globe.
Here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Larson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will yield my time to Representative Houlihan of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Larson, and thank you all for coming. Before I start with my question, I want to kind of pause for a minute on Representative Wilson's comments regarding troops in Poland and respectfully disagree. I'm not certain that it is necessarily a deterrence, but possibly an escalation by moving troops to Poland. And my father is Polish-born, and so I personally have heard from him about the history of that war-torn area of our planet, and I worry about that. But my questions are for you, Dr. Anderson, and it's my understanding that this realignment will affect our posture in Africa. And so what is the process that the department will be using to determine where it will be relocating AFRICOM headquarters? And could you please describe what assessment you've made of how the realignment would affect our presence in Africa?
So as outlined on the 29th, the public rollout, the AFRICOM headquarters, which is currently in Stuttgart, Germany, will be moving to a different location to be determined. And there will be a number of factors involved there in making that determination, and including cost and receptivity of host nations, if it's going to be based in Europe or even in Africa, or if it were to move back to the United States, this is yet another possibility. Obviously, the services would be involved in consultation with Congress about potential destinations. So cost and operational efficiency would, and as applicable, any host nation permissions, those would all be among the variables that the department would have to assess.
So do we have that sort of data on where it currently exists so that we could compare whatever the 2 options or 3 options are? And why would we decide just to move without any sort of information or data about where our staying put would put us in terms of cost-benefit analysis?
So I don't have those details on the current costs of maintaining that headquarters, but I am confident that we will find operational efficiencies in moving that, and also meeting the presidentially directed cap of our forces in Germany.
And how would you make an assessment of what the effect would be with our relationship in Africa, our presence in Africa? What sort of factors would come into play there? You mentioned specifically maybe moving to the United States, which sort of doesn't seem like a sensible solution.
So I worked in the Pentagon in the 2000s, and I remember well the vigorous debates that ensued at that time when AFRICOM was established on where it could or should be located. And it's my full expectation that we will have a similarly vigorous debate this time around on the potential destinations of AFRICOM. And I know that General Townsend, the combatant commander for AFRICOM, is working with his staff to develop such options.
Thank you. And with the remainder of my time, General Allvin, this question is probably in the classified environment, but I would like to just put it out there and potentially have a follow-up with you. I would be interested to know if the department has updated operation plans for various Russian-related contingencies, given the proposed changes to our posture in Europe.
Congresswoman, we can certainly go into more detail at a higher level of classification. I will tell you that the EUCOM staff did consider those when they were developing this realignment posture, the concept as well. They were considered, both the current ones and including some of the shortfalls and the opportunities with this, but I can go at a higher classification level with you.
And would we be able to follow up with you on more details on that at a different classification level?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is also for you, and I'm curious to see how EUCOM is working with allied agencies to counter Russian cyber threats and how the proposed posture changes would affect that work.
I know that actually from being on the staff from 2015 to 2018, I've been heartened in the last couple of years to see the actual improvement in the capabilities in the cyber realm within U.S. European Command to be able to not only address those, but also reach out to some potentially vulnerable, and that's about as much as I can go to in this classification level, partners within the region. I would say that the assessment I would have to defer to U.S. European Command for a specific assessment. I would say in general, though, the relationships and specifically how it pertains to cyber engagements and movements on that front, I would not anticipate a big change either way on that from the current positive path that it's on. But I would have to yield, and we can get back to you for the record with EUCOM for more details if you'd like on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I've run out of time, and thank you, Representative, and I yield back to the chair.
Thank you. Mr. Turner is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by stating that I share the chairman and the ranking member's skepticism concerning this plan, but I want to associate myself with the comments of Mr. Wilson. I think it's very important for us to have forward deployed troops, and having participated in observance of war games in Poland, I know how important our presence in Poland is in deterrence with respect to Russia. General, I want to begin with you. You were involved in the formulation of this plan, correct?
I was not personally involved in the formulation of this plan.
Okay. Have you reviewed the process upon which the formulation occurred? Have you had conversations with those who were putting the plan together?
I have.
Are you aware whether or not the NATO-Russia Founding Act of 1997 had an impact in the formulation of this plan, which prohibits the forward deployment of troops on a permanent basis in former Warsaw Pact countries?
I did consult with those who were developing the plan afterwards to ensure that the NATO-Russia Founding Act was taken into consideration, and they assured me that it was taken into consideration because the wording in the NATO-Russia Founding Act talks about significant forces permanently stationed rather than rotational.
Now, Russia doesn't see it that way, right, General? I mean, Russia believes that rotational forces that have a continuing presence are, in fact, permanent. Isn't that their objection that they've made to this plan?
That's their objection. I don't know that that's what they believe in their hearts, or if that's part of the competition rhetoric.
If there wasn't the NATO-Russia Founding Act, would we have approached this differently?
I would have to yield to the EUCOM staff for that. I think we look at the evolution of the strategic environment and take that into account, but I can't speak on their behalf as to whether that would have significantly altered the path.
General, if we're in a conflict with Russia, do you believe that the Atlantic is contested space?
I do.
Wouldn't that mean that by having rotational forces, that it complicates our ability to rotate forces, to augment, supplement, or to even, as Dr. Anderson was saying, to give us the flexibility as to what we have in Europe?
Congressman, to keep it at this classification level, I would say that while our ability to rotate forces into the theater would be challenged, the existence of the amount of permanent presence forces there would not be significant enough to successfully engage decisively the Russians in a conflict. So one would still have to deploy significant amounts of forces in which the Atlantic would be contested regardless.
General, when you commit to rotational forces as opposed to permanent forces, isn't it true that rotational forces can actually have an increased cost above what permanent basing of forces would be?
I would yield to the services for that, but it is my understanding that there is an increased cost. Now that can be mitigated through different means, whether it be keeping the equipment there or not. There are different ways that it can be mitigated, and the advantages of rotational forces can outweigh that. I would yield to the services for that.
Dr. Anderson, Russia has obviously been in violation of the NATO-Russia Founding Act. They too had representations in the agreement, which is not a treaty and is not therefore binding to the United States. And their incursions both into Georgia and to Ukraine would certainly be violations of that act. If the NATO-Russia Founding Act was not being adhered to by the United States in this plan, would you have scoped it differently, and would you have looked at placing permanent troops forward-based?
I would also have to defer to the EUCOM staff on those on that particular question. But I would say that I would just reemphasize the value of the rotational forces. The cost is a consideration. In some cases, it may go up, but in other cases, with the rotational forces, you don't have the costs associated with families being PCSed overseas. So that would, in fact, be a cost savings. Again, once you get through kind of a transition period, which is envisioned to take years.
Well, Dr. Anderson, I'm not a fan of the United States adhering to agreements that Russia continuously violates, and I do fear that in this instance we may be scoping our plans and policies by limiting ourselves to an act that is at this point meaningless. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney.
And for holding this hearing, and to our witnesses for being here today. One aspect of this plan which we haven't talked about, which strikes me as one of the oddest part of the proposal, is the scaling back of the continuous presence of our Marines in Norway. Last October, Mr. Norcross and I spent some time in Norway, meeting with defense officials, members of the Norwegian military. The tempo of anti-submarine warfare activity that the U.S. is collaborating with Norway has gone through the roof in the last few years, which I'm sure both witnesses are very familiar with. As a government and as a country, they, for so many reasons, are so critical as an ally. They are the NATO member in the High North. They, are a whisker away from hitting their NATO GDP target in terms of defense spending, and we went through, again, the increases that they've been investing in a whole variety of areas that's there, and they border Russia. The rationale about ending continuous presence of the Marine Corps in Norway, this committee has spent really the last 5 years on a bipartisan basis supporting the European Defense Initiative as a way of reassuring our allies. And that was a big part of the conversations that we were having with defense officials and government officials while we were there. So explain what was the rationale of doing that, again, at a very critical time with a country that's obviously really hitting above its weight in the region as an ally of this country. What has been the reaction And given the fact that they did the Black Sea rotations out of Norway with that Marine unit, and that purportedly is one of the things that you're focused on, how is the newly planned rotations to the Black Sea any different than what we're already doing with those troops that are in Norway?
So a couple of points. NATO, Norway remains a key, actually a founding member of NATO, and obvious importance for its geographic location, as you noted, sir. The the Marine Corps is a expeditionary force and readiness. Has decided that it. They are going to continue to take advantage of the relationship that we have with Norway and the fact that we have pre-positioned equipment up there, but just do so in a different way, in a more rotational way that will provide additional flexibility, and also is very consistent with the National Defense Strategy and the emphasis on dynamic force employment, where we don't necessarily telegraph, all our movements years in advance. We can do things on short notice. We can change the schedule up in a way that's operationally unpredictable. And that's Marine Corps is very capable of moving quickly. And this is something that will, as talked about earlier, provide the United States with some additional benefits.
So so you're saying this actually enhances the ability to have a deterrence capability in that region. That's your statement today.
Combined with the other moves described with respect to this posture realignment, yes, I do believe it's going to enhance deterrence.
So and again, the question regarding the Black Sea rotations, which again already are occurring with those Marines in Norway today, how is the newly planned Black Sea deployments? What's the change there? What's the benefit for not using Norway's unit as the resource?
So one of the main pieces envisioned with the posture realignment is that there will be some striker units that will be moving to the Black Sea region, and on a rotational basis. So that is, I'm not aware that Marines that were up in Norway are necessarily moving or planning to rotate to the Black Sea region. They might, but again, that's part of the value of having this rotational flexibility.
They are actually doing precisely that, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to focus both Dr. Anderson and Lieutenant General Allvin on the 2020 agreement that was signed with Poland, setting the conditions for burden sharing and moving the troops, 1,100 more service members, into Poland. So was there or is there any discussion about moving more of the troops from Germany into Poland instead of relocating those troops back to the United States? And is a permanent U.S. base in Poland something that you foresee may happen?
So I'll start on that one. We do have approximately 4,500 troops on a rotational basis going through Poland, and the agreement that was signed this summer by the president and his counterpart envisions another 1,000 thereabouts being deployed on a rotational basis, and it will include elements of the 5th Corps headquarters element. And that will provide our Army units clearly in Europe with additional sort of eastward presence that they do not currently have. And we think that the rotational basis is the appropriate agreement with the Polish government.
So you don't see any of the troops that are currently in Germany being moved to be part of the 1,100 that's over in Poland?
No, ma'am. Those are there. I would describe the European force posture restructuring and the enhanced defense cooperation agreement as separate but complementary in their impact and their effect.
So I was in Poland last year with some of my other colleagues here, Haas. We were at Poznan, we were at Powitz, the air base there, and can attest that a lot of the training facilities are pretty austere. In Poland, I understand that's one of the issues that needs to be addressed, the development of training range infrastructure, and it's my understanding that Poland has agreed to help pay for that and to construct that. Can you tell me both the timeline of that and what is the nature of the training grounds that will need to be constructed?
So the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement does does provide for the Polish government to assist with these infrastructure improvements. I would have to get back to you on the particular timing of those, ma'am.
Okay, and switching gears to the 2nd Cavalry Regiment that is returning back to the United States, what is the process to determine where their location is going to be, their new home station, and what's the timeline for stationing them back to the U.S.? And along with that, what infrastructure will be needed for them to return?
So the timeline is will take some time. I mean, as we've said consistently, this is months of planning and years of execution. So that precise timeline is to be determined, and that will be, in consultation with, obviously, with Congress and also the services on where they may end up in the United States.
So do you have any idea how much infrastructure will need to be built to sustain them, or will that be determined once you determine the location, I assume?
The latter, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Is Mr. Norcross with us? I don't. Mr. Norcross, is he? No, sir. He is not. Mr. Gallego. Mr. Gallego is with us remotely. Ruben, you hearing me there?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can. Thank you very much. I apologize. I'm still in shock to begin with in regards to the. I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm still in shock to begin with, about the decision-making process that we saw going into this, and that's just kind of wanted to make sure that you all understand part of my statement here. Many of us a couple of us attended a briefing, classified briefing, that I think a lot of us were came out not very satisfied in terms of where the rationale, and not only where the rationale came from, but then the method that was used to basically hit the goals that were set by the president. So I just want to stick that out. To go into further questions, so General Allvin, have we seen a decrease in Russian military activity or general decrease in the threat from Russia in the past couple of years?
No, Congressman, we haven't.
Okay, and I agree. Today, for the NDA, I wrote the amendment in this year's NDA putting restrictions on troop withdrawals and move to get rid of infrastructure in Europe. So tell me, how to get troops out of Germany or Europe with all well-placed defense against Russian attack, anything other than a soft gift, in my opinion, to the Kremlin that's still actively trying to exert its influence over Europe.
Well, Congressman, all I can really offer on that front is that as we're looking to execute the national defense strategy, we take into account not only what Russia is doing, but we also have to take into account what China is doing. We also have to take into account what is happening with respect to our readiness, trying to recover readiness. We also have to take into account the fact that despite the fact that Congress has been very, very generous with the budget, we can anticipate that there will be probably downward pressure on the budget. So as we look at how we can best array the forces to deter across the globe, if we were to take Europe in isolation, it is a very, very defensible argument to talk about that maybe we should have more forces in Europe. And at the same time, one might say we need to have more forces in the Indo-PACOM AOR to push back on that aggression. But as those sort of conflict with each other, the idea that we would develop a new approach to deterrence, and that approach is founded on dynamic force employment, that in order to do that, some of these these force alignments and these force reposturing enable the Secretary to have more freedom to be able to do dynamic force employment to not only deter in Europe, but also to deter in the Indo-Pacific. Now that is going to require something though. That is going to require our ability to demonstrate that we can deploy forces in a rapid manner, in a operationally unpredictable manner, in that the new decision calculus, which is the baseline of deterrence. The new decision calculus is based on the idea that even though the forces may not be there in the way that they were before, that malign influence that is being considered is now perhaps deterred because of the idea that the forces will be there in an unpredictable manner, maybe not where they expected they would be, but it's still the cost and the risk outweighs the benefit of that malign activity. So it really is trying to understand with all those conflicting pressures how one best postures across the globe, which is why, as Dr. Anderson mentioned, the Secretary has directed the combatant command reviews across all of the combatant commands.
I'm glad my time. First of all, thank you. But to be clear, talking to many of our European defense ministers, if we want to talk about deterrence, the best deterrence, obviously, is having a strong alliance that trusts each other and believes in each other. These moves have really made a lot of our longstanding allies question whether we're really going to be there should the balloon go up. And speaking of just cost, Dr. Anderson, why hasn't the department sent the committee a cost estimate? Aside from actively harming our national security, in my opinion, we're going to need money to make these changes. Specifically, moving a combat command headquarters like AFRICOM is going to cost us billions of dollars. Where's that money going to come from? What's the estimate for all this stuff? How much it's going to cost?
So as Secretary Esper pointed out on the 29th of July, we're still formulating those cost estimates. He did note that it will be in the single-digit billions. That is the rough order of magnitude at this point. But clearly, going forward, subject to further planning and assessments, we will have a more refined estimate that we will be able to share with the committee.
Well, thank you. And I think, Dr. Anderson, this is just to be clear, we made a decision based on this president's decision to move a certain amount of troops out of Germany without any actual context of how this brings deterrence or national security. And then we had basically the Pentagon build I would say, a plan around that idea without any actual understanding.
If you could wrap that up quickly, Ruben.
So,
okay. The gentleman's time has expired. Thank you. Mr. Byrne is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I see that you got a master's from Troy State. You spent some time at Maxwell Air Force Base. Alabama proudly claims you, so I'm glad you're here. So I'm trying to understand some basics here, and I know you can help me. So a total of 12,000 military personnel are being repositioned, and I think I understand that 5,600 of those will be restationed within NATO, but 6,400 will be coming back to the United States. Do I have that correct?
That approximate number, yes.
Are the 6,400, are all of them going to be on a rotational basis, or are some of them not going to be on a rotational basis?
To my understanding, that as was briefed to the Secretary and the Secretary released on the 29th, some may be back maintaining readiness as well. So they're available.
When they come back on a rotational basis, are they still considered to be a part of the EUCOM force?
Yes, Congressman, they are.
Okay, so they're part of the EUCOM force, but they're in the United States, can be brought back at the pleasure of the commander. How do they get back?
Well, sir, there's a process that is called the Global Force Management process that I won't bore the committee with here, but it really, the combatant commander will request on a rotating basis certain types of forces for certain types of activities and justify it within the context of their global campaign plan and execution of the National Defense Strategy. That makes its way into the department. The chairman and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as a global integrator, will evaluate all of those requests and look at from a global perspective in the execution of the National Defense Strategy, and that will make its way up his military advice up to OSD and up to the Secretary for decision. So those rotational forces will be dispersed across the globe in accordance with the National Defense Strategy priorities. And that happens year to year. But on any given time, if you're counting noses in the theater, I think General Walters would say all of those, whether rotational or assigned, those are the forces he considers as part of the U.S.-European command force posture.
But I might make sure I understand what you're saying. Even though they're part of EUCOM, they've rotated back to the United States, they could be put in the Indo-PACON if that was the decision by the Department of Defense.
That's correct, Congressman. And another unit could actually go into Europe.
Right. So it does seem like, even though you're saying it's rotational, it does seem like we've got a net reduction of forces in country and available to UConn by 6,400. That's the way it seems to somebody that's not in uniform. Where am I wrong about that?
Well, you're not wrong. The idea is it could be at any time up to 6,400 fewer. However, at any given time, depending on the nature of which rotational forces have been requested and where, it could be no net loss. So there still is a variability. They are just no longer permanently with their families stationed there. But they could be, they or other units, like units or different units, can be there doing the same mission for the combatant commander.
But to do that, you've got to go through that process that you described. And I don't know whether that's a process that takes 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks, or 5 months, but it takes some time to make that decision.
Those decisions are made well ahead of time. So the decisions are going on right now for the types of forces that will be deployed in the end of fiscal year 21 into fiscal year 22. So those forces are known well ahead enough time so they can get trained up for the missions for which they have been designated to be allocated to the combatant commander for.
Well, I'm certainly not in a position to question someone that has your level of expertise and experience, but from a layperson's point of view, it looks like we've reduced our troop presence in Europe at a time that Russia is actually becoming more of a threat. And I hope you understand that's where some of us are coming from. We're saying this looks like we're pulling back, and we think we should be stepping forward. I'll never forget, I think it was my second month on this committee that Russia basically invaded the Ukraine, and nobody had any notice. We didn't have 5 months to plan. They just did it. And I have absolutely no confidence that Putin won't do that again. In fact, I have all the confidence in the world he will do it again, particularly if he thinks that we're weakening. And I worry, and I think some of our allies are worrying, that they're looking at this move as a weakening of American presence, a weakening of American resolve, a weakening of American capability operating with our NATO allies. So I'm just registering to you. I don't have Europe background, and I can't question you on the details of it. But from that sort of outsider's, layman's perspective, it looks like we're pulling back. And I think that bothers a lot of us. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. So I'm not sure if I'm looking at the screen who we have here. Ms. Horn is up next. Kendra, are you on anywhere? Does not appear that way. Mr. Cisneros. We were 0 for 2. Mr. Crow. I saw you. There you are. Jason, Mr. Crow is up. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, great.
Yes,
let
we
me
got
start
you.
with Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson, I was quizzical, to say the least, on your comment that there are no downsides of rotational forces. I just want to flesh that out for a minute. One is, our rotational forces, do they have as much time to train and develop relationships and interoperability with local NATO partner forces as permanently stationed forces do?
So even with rotational forces, we will have a limited presence within a particular country through which the rotational forces are moving.
But the forces themselves, they'll have less time than if they were permanently stationed, correct?
They will have less time within the country, that is correct.
Okay, next question. Do they have as good awareness of the terrain and the surrounding area with which they'll operate as a permanently based force?
So again, there will be liaisons, there will be forward
Well, the
elements.
forces themselves, I'm not concerned about the liaisons, headquarter people sitting back in headquarters offices, the forces themselves.
So the forces themselves will have I would say, a broader understanding of possible regions of the world that they may have to deploy.
So you're saying, Mr. Harris, you're saying that a rotational force coming from the United States that rotates for 6 to 9 months or a year will have a broader view, but will they have a greater or less understanding of the terrain with which they would operate in Eastern Europe if they were to be countering Russian aggression?
So they will not have the same degree of understanding as forces that.
Okay.
But they
Thank you, Mr.
will
Anderson.
retain a keen appreciation and a focus as
I
the
will
combat
reclaim my
commander
time,
knows.
Mr. Anderson, so they'll have less time and less awareness of the training. Secondly, will they have as much time with their families as a permanently stationed force in Europe would have?
So it depends on the nature and the frequency of the rotations.
Okay, Mr. Anderson, the answer is no to that, and you know that. They'll be rotating away from their families. Next is, will they have as much time to train on ranges and critical combat skills? Because if you're forward deploying or rotating, obviously a significant amount of time is spent actually deploying and redeploying. Will they have as much time doing critical combat skill training?
So 2 points. Even forces that are permanently stationed in Europe today deploy within Europe and are apart from their families at certain times. Secondly, for training, it really depends on the unit that we're talking about and the available ranges. It may, in some cases, actually have greater training and access in the United States, again, depending on the unit.
Okay. Well, Mr. Anderson, I think you and I both know that when you're deploying and redeploying forces, that takes significant time that could otherwise be spent on critical combat skills, and strains credulity that you would try to justify it that way. And there are indeed many downsides to rotational forces in terms of the readiness of our troops, and I believe you know that. So I don't appreciate you dodging those questions. Mr. Anderson, the Secretary of the Army, Mr. McCarthy, Secretary McCarthy, on July 21st, confirmed after returning from Europe that he had had no discussions with our European allies about a rebasing or a troop withdrawal as of July 21st. So why would the Secretary of the Army be unaware of this plan at that point and not be consulting with our allies?
I can't speak for the Secretary of the Army. I can assure you, though, that I was in contact with my counterparts at the policy level about this force structure reposturing.
Okay, General Allvin, turning to you for a moment. You've been in the military for a very long time and have been a part of a lot of discussions around repositioning and shifting of forces. Did the timeline and the process for this decision, was that consistent with the prior timelines and processes that you followed in the past?
Congressman, I would say that given the timeline when the Secretary directed the combatant command to do this, which was starting in January, I would say that this is not completely inconsistent. I would say that the complexity of this also is the reason why the Secretary has reserved the right to continue to make iterations as we get smarter. But this is a 6-month review is consistent. And I think the devil will be in the details of the updates to it and the implementation in order to make sure we measure twice and cut once.
Okay, thank you, General. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Conaway is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you. Nobody likes to have their decision second guessed, but that's the drill. So appreciate you being here this morning. I'm a CPA, and I kind of approach everything from the dollar standpoint. Dr. Anderson, did I hear you say earlier that there was a rigorous cost-benefit analysis done on the overall project of what was proposed in June? In other words, is it going to cost more money, less money? DOD budgets are always under pressure, given the tyranny of personnel costs constantly increasing. So what's the bottom line? Is it going to cost us more or less?
So we anticipate that this, in its totality, will, as a rough order of magnitude, cost in the single-digit billions. That is the estimate at this time. And as we go forward and refine those estimates, that number may go up or could be adjusted in some way.
I understand it would change if you changed your plan, but would you describe the process as being rigorous?
So as
or the back of a napkin seemed like
earlier, and as my colleague has pointed out, we're still in the process of developing and maturing this plan, and it is a complex one. There are a lot of moving pieces here, different headquarters going different places, and rotational forces, and subject to further refinement. So we just do not have a clear.
So could you anticipate a decision that we can't afford to do all of this and we unwind this? if it costs too much money? Or is cost not a factor?
So this is something obviously is going to be we're going to have to we will need congressional support obviously for any authorization or appropriations. It's my view that notwithstanding the pressure on the budget, that this is something that we will be able to afford, and the costs will be spaced out over time.
Yeah, Dr. Anderson, I would prefer you to have said I've got a rigorous analysis in that to come to that conclusion. I know that's what you want it to be, but let me ask you this, and this is just a bit of a real weird observation. In your testimony, you said the third leg would be to move 2,500 airmen from Royal Air Force Base Mendenhall to Germany, was planned to move to Germany, and that you're not going to do that. Is there a plan someplace in the bowels of the department that when that original decision was to move those air units, the air refueling and special ops, move to Germany, was there some sort of a justification plan that was done at that point in time that would have had some lofty phrases as to why that made sense? And now we're unwinding that decision. And the only rationale you put in your statement is that they would remain in the UK, thus ensuring uninterrupted readiness and responsiveness of these units. That leads me to believe that if we'd have gone through with a move to Germany, that it would have, in fact, interrupted their readiness and responsiveness. That's not what you're telling us, is it?
So whatever the justification for initially having the plan to move them to Germany, I'm not familiar with that. That I believe precedes my time in my current position. But what we do know is that in order to meet the cap of the reduction in Germany, this was a
okay.
This
So
is a move that makes sense.
This wasn't driven by a mission. This was driven by the caps.
Well, there's a cap, and there's also the added benefit, as pointed out in the statement, that there are efficiencies to remaining in with our close British.
So how much money was spent in Germany on the receiving base before we unwound this decision?
I don't have that detail, sir. I'd have to come back to you on that.
You have any idea when that decision was made to move that unit, those 2,500 airmen, and I assume their families, to Germany? Would we have been spending money at the receiving base in Germany at this during that time frame?
I will have to take that for the record and come back to you on the timeline.
If you would mind doing that, I'd appreciate it. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I do just have to make the comment, and I know you gentlemen are doing the job that is assigned to you by the Pentagon. This is why we need an actual undersecretary for policy, and this is why we need the positions that the Pentagon filled. I understand, Dr. Anderson, you're in a difficult position. You weren't here for the plans. You're in an acting position now. But there's a level of detail in a bipartisan way. This is just not acceptable from the Department of Defense. That, on a move of this kind, whatever you guys may think of Congress, whatever you may think of this committee, it is our responsibility to exercise oversight this. The American people, in their infinite wisdom, have put us in these chairs. And we are not getting the level of insight in this decision that we should. And I don't know if it's because you're in an acting position, acting in the role of or whatever, but I wasn't in on that. I didn't hear that. I'd have to talk to this person. I'd have to talk to that person. And again, you're doing what the Pentagon told you to do, and I'm not taking this out on you. But for the Pentagon to send this over on a decision of this level and not tell us, look, here's what we did, here's the timeline, here's the person we talked to this person, we didn't talk to that person. I mean, the level of detail that we're getting here is just not acceptable for us to exercise our oversight and for what the Pentagon should be putting in front of us. And I just want that on the record from my perspective. And I have the strong sense that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle would agree with me on that point. So on this and other decisions, we just need to hear better what the hell's going on so that we can exercise our oversight. And if you have a comment on that, you're welcome to. But it is a very frustrating briefing at this point.
So, Congressman, it's clearly not the case that we are not providing the details. We just, at this stage of the process, we don't have that level of detail. But we commit as the plan matures and we develop those details that we will share them with the committee.
That's alarming in its own right, but I take your point. Okay, next up we have Ms. Davis, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. You're obviously doing your job. We totally understand that. But I am taken back as well by the language that you're developing and maturing the plan. When do you think the plan is going to be matured?
So I would anticipate that, by early 2021, early in the new year, that we will have a much more mature plan to share with Congress.
And General Allvin, did you want to respond to that as well? Is that your time frame?
I don't have any better answer than that. Quite frankly, a lot of it will depend upon what Dr. Anderson has spoken about, all of the variables that need to come together. But to get as the chairman said, to get the details that would be satisfying, I would imagine would be into that time frame.
And I wonder, Dr. Anderson, of the details that you're talking about, what is it that concerns you the most that you don't have a feel for, that you don't feel is cooked?
So from a policy perspective, I'm very comfortable with this plan, and in fact, I think it is going to serve the interests of the National Defense Strategy that we promulgated in January 2018. So at that level, I'm very pleased with the approach. I think it is going to enhance deterrence and assure allies and provide us more flexibility. I too am interested in the cost details. Cost is, as we think about budgets in the future, obviously a large concern. So that is something that we'll certainly be keeping an eye on.
Okay. Thank you. I know that in the testimony that you all presented, you pointed to airmen that had been scheduled to rebase to Germany and that they would remain in the UK. And you said that they would do so to ensure that the uninterrupted readiness and responsiveness of these units would be realized. I'm wondering about other units that have been designated to be moved experiencing an interruption in their readiness and responsiveness. What can we expect on that level?
So there will be a timing and a phasing and a sequencing of all these moves. I can say with confidence they're not going to all happen at once. They'll be spaced out over time. And because of that, we will be very attuned to any temporary disruption or interruptions in readiness or capabilities.
And you'll be planning for that?
Yes, indeed. And I would also note in the broader sweep of NATO's history, we've made moves, even larger moves, and we have done so without compromising our overall capabilities or readiness.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. General Allvin, you did mention the families, and we know how critical and how important that is. The men and women who serve our country have a vote in this, and they do it often by their feet. And so I wonder what you're doing to mitigate the impact on those families, and what cost do you incur as you attempt to realign them?
Well, Congresswoman, primarily one of the five that the Secretary laid out was to take care of the service members and the families. And I think that goes to largely the idea of planning this out ahead of time to be able to ensure that when the move happens, and of course, as you mentioned, ma'am, the service members and the families, they have to be resilient because they move here and there and everywhere. That's a part of life, but we don't need to make it more complicated. So the idea that as the moves are being contemplated, the department ensures, and the chairman is very engaged on this as well, that the landing location, wherever that will be when these moves happen, will be in full consultation with the services who are responsible for the organized training and equipped to provide them the combatant commands, as well as this body and others to ensure that, as I said before, measure twice, cut once. So we won't.
Do you have a sense that it's really important to surge personnel in order to address the needs of families? Often families feel that it takes forever for them to get the attention that they need in order to plan themselves for a move that can be detrimental in terms of the education of their children and many other facets of this. What will be done to bring on more personnel in order to address it?
First of all, Congresswoman, I would say the way you put it is very eloquent and very accurate. I anticipate that the chairman will work with the Joint Chiefs as well as the service in their hats as service chiefs to ensure that as those moves, which are executed by the services, that they are doing that, as you said, surge the personnel to where you're able to communicate what's required and how they can anticipate that, so they at least have some predictability.
Thank you, sir. My time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon. It's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first want to just start off by congratulating General Allvin. I've had multiple assignments with him, and for him to be getting his 4th star, the Air Force is selecting the right person. So congratulations to you. And we've had a little bit of a debate up here on the forward presence of forces, and I believe that we absolutely need forward presence in Poland and the Baltics. We've seen in the past with Georgia and Ukraine how Russia responds to perceived weakness. So I'm a big supporter of making sure we have a presence. I would even prefer a permanent presence in Poland and the Baltics to make our intentions and our deterrence clear. And my first question is to Dr. Anderson, if I may. I used to be the commander at Ramstein, and I was the deputy at 3rd Air Force. What's our plans for Spangdahlem in the long run? Because I believe both Spangdahlem and Ramstein are strategic bases that we have to preserve because of the airlift capacity. The airlift capacity cannot go strictly on Ramstein. We know that. And it's in the perfect spot for un-air-refueled C-17s that get there and then get to the Middle East or Africa. And without Spangdahlem, I think we're in trouble. So just curious your perspective.
So certainly in the context of moving to greater rotational forces, there's still a role for hubs, logistics hubs and air bases that can and should be retained. So I would that is part of our thinking on the European force structure reposturing.
So your intentions to maintain Spangdahlem as an airlift hub?
So I know that we're going to retain the hubs. I want to be a little bit. I want to caveat this a little bit because I'm not familiar with the exact nature of what's being planned for that particular base.
Well, just let me put my perspective out there. That whole capacity can't fall in Ramstein. I know it, or I just know it firsthand. And both those bases are your primary conduits in the Middle East and Africa, and would be for the rest of Europe if you had troubles in Poland or the Baltics. So I'm worried about pulling out of Spangdahlem totally. I could see some force realignment, but that airlift hub is critical.
Yes, and our defense planners are fully aware of those advantages. Yes, sir.
Another question. I always was concerned about pulling out of Mildenhall. The United Kingdom, Great Britain's our best ally in NATO. Through thick and thin, they've been with us. I didn't really care for how we handled that to begin with, so I'm glad that we're maintaining force presence at Mildenhall. What's the plan for Fairford? Because we were talking about moving the RC-135s there.
So I'm not sure. I don't know if my colleague is aware of the particulars on that.
Congressman, I will take that for the record because I think that having experienced Europe as you have as well, you understand that. And so I will, in the context of what General Walters is currently pursuing, we'll take that for the record and get back to you. But to your point on Mildenhall, as you recall, that it was a European infrastructure consolidation which was made in a different time. And so Mildenhall, while not only serving as a refueling, can also help augment that critical through flow for enabling global operations as an airlift hub as well. Can help to augment those two bases you mentioned in Germany, sir.
Let me just plant this thought too. We have built a strong relationship with Great Britain when it comes to reconnaissance. We have sold them RC-135s. We operate out of there. I think it would be wise to have a joint base with the UK and ourselves doing the RC-135 operations. You get great synergy, and we both gain from it. It's a win-win. So I'm a proponent for it. Let me just close on this. I'm a little concerned about where we're going with Germany. I think we have a growing rift. They used to be on the front lines, obviously in the Cold War, but now they're more of the logistics hub. And I'm concerned that we're burning bridges with the populace and the political leadership there, with a country that we absolutely have to have a good rapport with if we have a conflict with Russia down the road. Are we a threat of burning bridges too far with Germany? Because that should be a concern to us. Now, I defer to you, Dr. Anderson.
Well, a couple points. I mean, Germany certainly plays a constructive role. They've been helpful in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and also been an outstanding partner in counterterrorism activities. All that said, the president and the secretary are absolutely right in asserting that Germany can and should pay more in terms of its defense budget. The Wales Pledge was agreed to unanimously in 2014. To get to 2% within 10 years, and Germany is currently lagging at about 1.5%. They do have a plan to get to 2%, but that's not going to happen by their terms by 2030. So we would certainly encourage Berlin to advance that timeline.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll just close with this, that they are paying under 2%, but we still need them to have a strong alliance. So we got to find a way to make that work. And I'll just say, hey, we're going to have a great vice chief of staff.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Garamendi is recognized for 5 minutes.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we lost you there, John. Are you still with us?
I'm more and more convinced. I am. It should be there.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, if you're speaking, we can no longer hear you. Appreciate that helpful insight. Yeah, I'm sorry, John. We've got a connection problem here because we are not hearing you. You're moving stiltedly. So we'll see if we can fix that. In the meantime, I don't see him on the screen, though. Mr. Cisneros is the next one who is up. Mr. Cisneros, you are recognized for 5 minutes if your device functions. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Thanks to our panel for being here today. And I know this has been asked, but I will kind of ask it again. But based on Secretary Esper's comments, this realignment will be expensive, not to mention the impact of realignment on morale for our service members and their families. Does the department expect any savings or increased burden sharing contributions from Germany as a result of the realignment that would compensate for the cost of the proposed forced posture changes? General Allvin, what is the plan for the military families of U.S. service members who are affected by this realignment?
So let me start with the question on Germany. Certainly it is our hope, and it is indeed our expectation that Germany will live up to the Wales Pledge going forward. And I would say even more broadly with respect to this realignment plan for European force structure, we will look for opportunities where our allies can contribute, and in terms of the funding element of this. Because this does need to be a shared burden. With respect to the families, and I'll ask my counterpart to elaborate, but certainly this ties in directly with Secretary Esper's commitment that he stated on numerous occasions that we are going to take care of our service members and our families throughout this entire process. And what that means in very practical terms is that as the plan matures and we have timelines, that we will keep them informed. And I would also note that there are no near term, by that in the next couple months, PCS moves that are currently envisioned. All that will be scoped out and communicated appropriately.
And Congressman, I'll follow up with what Dr. Anderson mentioned. The plan really for the families is as I mentioned when I was speaking with Representative Davis, the understanding the scope and the ultimate destination, which has to be 100% in consultation with this body as well as the services. The services who will eventually, they are the ones who do the organized training and equip. They will be part and parcel of understanding that particular puzzle and the right location for those service members and families to go who will be rotated back. But as Representative Davis said, I feel very confident that I can speak on behalf of the services on this to say that surging ahead of time, surging the people to ensure that the families are made well aware and have a predictability, because we understand families need to be resilient. The best that we can do on this is to give them the predictability so they aren't sort of whiplashing around between one eventuality and the next.
All right, thank you. So, Mr. Anderson, there's talk about moving an F-16 squadron to Italy from Germany, also moving 2,000 troops to Belgium. But yet, Belgium nor Italy meet NATO's target for defense spending, which seems to be inconsistent with the administration's reasoning with moving these troops out. So how can you speak towards the inconsistency of moving the comments that the president's made, that Germany is not paid its dues and not doing its part, so he's moving troops out, but yet we're moving troops into other areas of NATO that have also been not kind of met their part, as well as their financial obligation.
So in the formulation of the concept, which is transitioning to a plan, the defense planners did not look at a scorecard of who's paying what as a determining factor on where rotational units would go. They made these assessments based upon their best military judgment and what makes sense operationally in terms of the broader restructuring.
All right. So the president, his comment about delinquent and they haven't paid their NATO fees. This is not the reason we're not punishing Germany for moving these troops out.
So again, going back to an earlier point, EUCOM has been thinking about force posture moves on a continuous basis, and then receives specific direction from Secretary Esper in the January-February timeframe. And it's fair to say that the president's guidance did accelerate the process and has brought us to this point where we are sharing the concept.
Thank you, gentlemen's time has expired. Ms. Gabbard is next and is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses here. I know earlier you briefly touched on impacts to AFRICOM, but I'm wondering if you can go into a little bit more detail both on where AFRICOM missions will pull their forces from with this change, given they share troops with the Europe AOR, and also how will this change impact any intel gathering capabilities or other shared capabilities that currently exist between the two commands?
So with respect to AFRICOM, ma'am, there too, the department is undergoing a combatant command blank slate review of missions and tasks and deployments, and that is currently ongoing. And when Secretary Esper makes final decisions with respect to the positioning of those forces, we will share those appropriately. With respect to intelligence and warning, certainly agree with the point or the importance of that on multiple fronts, to include going back to our earlier discussion about moving rotational forces to the European continent and back to the United States. It's absolutely imperative that we have appropriate intelligence and surveillance that will provide us sufficient indications and warning time in order to make these moves.
And forgive me if you already talked about this, I didn't hear it, but how will this new realignment impact the burden sharing contributions that come from Germany, and how that will impact them as well as how it will impact us?
So moving forward on this realignment, we will look for opportunities where allies can contribute financially in a meaningful way. Some of those costs will obviously be but we will look for those opportunities. And then I would say more broadly, we continue to expect our European allies to live up and to fulfill the Wales Pledge that was unanimously agreed to in 2014. I would also say on the cost front and the financial front that NATO has made progress. There are more countries now that are at or above the 2% limit. Those include not only, of course, ourselves, United States, but Bulgaria, Greece, United Kingdom, Estonia, Romania, Lithuania, Latvia, and also Poland. And there are some other countries that soon will be at that 2% level. So that is a positive trajectory.
So specifically with Germany, I mean, you have a very specific number of troops that will be repositioned back here in the United States. Are you not able to speak specifically to how that burden sharing agreement will be impacted both Germany and the United States because it has to be renegotiated, or you don't know?
Well, with respect to the target for defense spending, the Germany, as with the other NATO partners, is expected to reach the 2%, and they have articulated that they can get there in 2030. It is our position that they can and they should move that timeline much earlier to get to 2%. And I would also say that it's, we talk about the 2% level all the time and for the appropriate reasons, but there's also the, we have to focus on not just the number, but what are actually the capabilities. And there it's, there is a 20% target of defense spending that would be invested in actual, no kidding, military capabilities.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Torres-Small is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both so much for being here. I really appreciate your service to our country. Acting Undersecretary Anderson, I wanted to follow up on the conversation that you had with Congress members Wilson and Houlihan about AFRICOM headquarters. And really appreciate your conversation, that you mentioning the factors that you would discuss, that you would review. So you mentioned cost and receptivity of the host nation as factors for consideration in the relocation. Will you also consider time zone?
I think I'm not sure how. I don't think that would be a big consideration, ma'am.
Okay, in terms of ease of communication and coordination.
I mean, we have certain, obviously we have combatant commands that are in different time zones, and both General Allvin and myself, we just manage that, right? Sometimes we have late night calls or early morning calls, depending on which combatant command we're talking about. I do not see that as a big issue in the considerations.
Okay, what about proximity to the continent?
So there, again, I don't want to get beyond the three broad possible destinations, whether it be in the European continent or in Africa or the United States. They all have particular advantages and disadvantages that need to be sorted out.
Well, and part of making that decision is identifying all of those advantages and disadvantages, correct?
Yes.
So would you consider as one of those advantages or disadvantages proximity to the continent?
To
Africa.
That is among among the considerations. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And are there any other considerations that you think are important for determining the headquarters for AFRICOM?
I think the ones that we've talked about are the main ones.
So in your response to Congresswoman Houlihan, you committed to ensuring that the decision would be made in consultation with Congress. And I deeply appreciate that, and also appreciate you reaffirming that for Chairman Smith and Congresswoman Davis regarding the entire realignment. In regards to AFRICOM headquarters, will you commit to ensuring that DOD provides an assessment of all the factors we just identified and present them to this committee in advance of that determination?
Yes, I commit to that.
Thank you. I appreciate that because it is deeply important. These are vital decisions that affect our deterrence posture, our relationship with allies, and all of our national security. Do you agree with that?
Yes, the committee obviously has a tremendous role to play in this process.
Thank you very much. I wonder then why the decision was made to move AFRICOM headquarters in the first place without such consultation.
Mm-hmm. So part of that, as mentioned previously in the discussion, is to seek operational efficiencies and also to meet the directed cap of the reductions regarding Germany.
Would consultation with Congress have impacted that?
I'm not sure if it would or would not have impacted that.
So what is the difference between now as we identify the future location and the importance of consultation with Congress at that point compared to the decision to relocate it in the first place?
So as for the actual the consideration that came up, that the EUCOM staff came up with, I cannot speak that directly. I can say that we are on have been on a bit of an accelerated timeline. But now we're in a different place, and as the plan matures, as you've heard, we absolutely will consult with Congress as this plan matures.
So there is no articulable distinction between the need for consultation to move headquarters in the first place and the final location. Both are important decisions that Congress should be part of and consulted about.
And we have brief members and staff members on these proposed moves.
Thank you. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Keating, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman.
You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson, you said, quote unquote, that the decision with removing the nearly 12,000 troops in Germany was a quote unquote presidential decision. Then you went on with your testimony to talk about the fact that Secretary Esper has been doing a review of rotations in Europe. Now, it's important for this committee and our relationship and our decision making to understand the joinder of the two things, because you didn't connect them one way or the other. I want to ask you specifically, was that review by Secretary Esper then made concrete, and did he place that on the president's desk for a decision, or did the president make that decision and then inform Secretary Esper? Which way was it?
So, Congressman, I'm not privy to discussions between the president and the secretary, so I can't comment on that.
I want to echo what the chairman said. Then why are you here? This committee deserves answers to that. That's critical to our decision making. In fact, there were about 4 or 5 days between the time that Germany informed the president, the Chancellor Merkel informed the president that she's likely not attending the G7 summit when this was announced. Do you think that's a coincidence, a mere coincidence? Or more importantly, since you may not know the answer to that, don't you think that creates a tension and a problem with one of our central members of one of our central alliances for our security? Don't you see the appearance of that?
So I would say, as articulated very clearly in our National Defense Strategy, Line of Effort 2, we are committed to our allies and partners.
I know that. Answer the question. Don't you understand the problem with that appearance? Yes or no?
The problem
Answer
with
the
which,
question,
Congressman?
Please. I'm sorry?
If I could translate, the question basically is the appearance of, okay, Germany doesn't come to the G7 summit, which the president doesn't like. A couple days later, the president announces that he's pulling 12,000 troops out of Germany. It appeared to be a petulant response to something he didn't like that Germany did. And I guess the question, sorry, Bill, I'll give you more time, would be twofold. Would be one, doesn't that appearance look bad? And two, what did the department do to try to make sure that that appearance didn't create the obvious problem?
Well, sometimes after the fact is not because of the fact. And I would note historically, for example, that in 2004, the Bush administration decided to remove 30,000 troops from the European theater, and including a lot of those from Germany. And at the time, there was a lot of speculation that was because Germany did not support us in the Gulf War, and that I would argue.
Claim my time.
So, you know, I can only speak to the plan and the connection to the NDS, and that is there's a very positive relationship there. This will improve our security.
Mr. Chairman, can I reclaim my time and just follow up?
Yes, go ahead. Sorry, it is awkward with the back and forth on the video, but yes, Mr. Keating, please proceed.
Now, you also said that Secretary Esper's plan had involved a lot of strategy with rotation to make sure. One of the things you cited in your testimony was the deterrence to Russia and the importance of that. And clearly, we all agree. Everyone in this committee agrees with that. But at the same time, the president interceded with cutting $500 million extra out of the European deterrence initiative, which was consistent in line with our national defense strategy. Now, how does that make sense? And again, was that the president's decision, or was that part of Secretary Esper's strategic plan? Because it's in contradiction with Secretary Esper's strategic plan to be making those cuts and using them to paint the wall at the border black. $500 million. Now tell me where the consistency of that is and who made that decision. Was that part of a strategic decision by the Secretary?
So with respect to the European Deterrence Initiative, there have been a number of military infrastructure projects that have come to completion, and because of that, the budget request has been there's a slight decrease in that funding level, but we're very confident that the funding level is indeed appropriate, and that EDI is consistent with and will be complementary to the proposed force structure.
I would say I'm closing.
Envisioned here.
Include saying, I'll tell you what isn't consistent. What isn't consistent, given even past relationships with this committee and our defense and our secretariat and indeed administrations, what's not consistent is getting a straight answer to questions and circumventing the will of this committee and Congress. I yield back.
Mr. Garamendi wants to give it another shot, so we will try that. John, you're on again.
Well, here I am. Hopefully it'll work. I'm going to make this very, very short. This hearing has been extremely important and very no justification for what is being proposed here. This whole thing started, as Mr. Keating said in his comment, with our 6 months later, with the entire Department of Defense trying to figure out how to make it happen. Bottom line is, it makes no sense whatsoever. Not from beginning to end, and we can go on for several days about that. Bottom line is, in the National Defense Authorization Act, we simply have to stop this. Stop this foolishness. I'll yield back at this point.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Mr. Brown is up next. Anthony is with us. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank my colleagues on the committee on both sides of the aisle for their comprehensive set of questions, and I too am disappointed with the incompleteness and in some cases the shallowness of the responses. Nevertheless, most of my questions have been asked, so let me ask about some specific issues, and both of my questions go to General Allvin. As part of the realignment plan, Air Force F-16 fighters the proposal is to ship them from Germany to Italy. Secretary Esper has stated, as many have commented today, that the changes are not meant as a punishment to Germany, but are part of an effort to, quote, strengthen the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, enhance the deterrence of Russia. So my question is, how does a move of F-16s southeast in a distance of less than 400 kilometers improve efforts to deter Russian aggression? What is the cost of moving the F-16s down to Alviano, and will updates need to be made to the bases and the hangars and other facilities to house these additional aircraft.
Congressman, I'll address the last two first. And then again, those cost estimates are ongoing. I don't have the answer to that. And I know if we go back to UCOM, they haven't finalized those cost estimates to this point. To the question of what good does it do to move Air Force fighters from Germany to Italy, I'm quoting General Walters now, I believe in some of his earlier responses, is the idea is you're sort of broadening the attack surface. Really, the idea that Russia is just inclined to do things in the Baltic region because that's where we sort of strengthened up. I think they have perhaps designs for malign influence throughout the periphery. And so Southeast Europe becomes as important as, so the Black Sea becomes as important as the Baltic Sea. And the idea that we would expand down into Italy and enhance that ability in Aviano to be able to better address some of the things that are happening in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea as well. It puts another axis of approach for the EUCOM commander. And that was why General Walters opted for that particular piece of the overall plan.
Well, I appreciate that. I do appreciate that rationale and explanation. The second question I had, again, a very specific question. The 7th Army Training Command in Grafenwehr, and that, as you know, is a very large training facility, 233 square kilometers, used by both U.S. and NATO allies for major training exercises, field artillery exercises, large armor exercises. Is there any intention to close Grafenwehr? Are there intentions to open additional major training centers anywhere else in Europe?
Congressman, that's a very important question. To my knowledge, there is not any plans to close it, but I will take that for the record because your point is well taken about the capabilities there. And we'll take that for the record and get back to, at this point, my understanding of it, there is not a plan to close that important training facility, but I owe you a more complete answer, sir. Over.
And let me just finish then with this sort of statement. You know, we've heard a lot about dynamic force employment today, and we find that in the National Defense Strategy. That's a concept that deals, as I understand, with operational deployment to eliminate predictability. And I get a sense that we're using it in today's hearing interchangeably and perhaps inappropriately with rotational force presence. We have a strategic commitment to NATO to be present in Europe. Either it's rotational or it's permanent. But in many ways, it's predictable because rotational force deployments or presence is heel to toe. So I'm not quite clear on how going to a more rotational force presence in Europe maintains our commitment to our strategic presence in Europe. And you don't have time to really respond. If you could take that for the record and just tell me how we're accomplishing dynamic force employment at the same time as rotational force presence in Europe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I have Mr. Brindisi on the list here. I don't see him on the screen anymore. And Ms. Slotkin, is she up there somewhere? Or she's... Okay. I'm sorry. So Mr. Golden, Ms. Trahan, they're not up there either? Okay. Ms. Escobar, you're not on the list, but you are here. Did you, if you wish, you may, I yield 5 minutes to you. Let's do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and many thanks to our witnesses. I'd like to join in the chorus of voices that on a bipartisan basis have expressed disappointment at the lack of detail during this hearing today. But I do appreciate that you are here. Lieutenant General Allvin, I have some questions for you. I want to drill down just a little bit more on the question of sort of cost-benefit analysis, which began with the chairman's initial question. What impacts do you foresee the realignment having on the Army's limited MFGI sites like Fort Bliss? I represent Congressional District 16 in Texas, so obviously there is a direct concern for me on that front.
And ma'am, I do have to start with that. I am not familiar with that. So that is one we'll take for the record, because I am not sideswiping or anything. I am not familiar enough to give you a complete answer on the service impacts of the concept.
Okay. So also to be taken back and hopefully so that we can learn a little bit more as you learn a little bit more about this. One of the concerns that we have or that my office has and that we've expressed to different parties through leadership is that there are current infrastructure limitations that prevent units from meeting Army standards for efficiently deploying an armored brigade combat team. And so I'd like for you to please look into that as well and get back to me when possible. And then would also like to learn more about whether there would be infrastructure improvements that could be made in order to address those deficiencies that, that we may see this domino effect down the line. So would like to hear back on that. And then just want to say finally, 11,900 troops strikes me as a significant cut to the force in the region. How do you expect this to impact operations? What will we have to sacrifice?
So ma'am, to be clear, I understand by saying this, I don't want to diminish the point that you make, but in fact, the 11,900 in the current concept aren't all leaving the region. So there'll be about half those that will come, half of those will be better dispersed for the region. But your point is still a valid one in understanding how it will affect our approach to the region. And I think that gets to the point of understanding how we will execute the rotational forces and to the point by Representative Escobar, I believe, on the difference between dynamic force employment and rotational forces. This really is at the heart of trying to institute this new approach to deterrence, because the current understanding of deterrence being present, you got to be present there. That is a way to impact adversary decision calculus on when they're anticipating whether they have a cost-benefit analysis of proceeding with malign behavior. But the idea that if we're trying to do this in accordance with the national defense strategy, with the myriad threats and adversaries that are emerging across the globe, the services cannot maintain readiness and have all those forces forward. So to try and bridge that gap is this new concept. The idea would be through the operational unpredictability and the continued episodic presence to be able to put doubt in the mind of an adversary who might be considering malign behavior. That, deterrence is decision calculus based on perception is based on experience. So we're trying to change the experience that will still have the same perception that we'll have on the calculus. So this is arguably a new approach to deterrence rather than just a forward presence. So the idea would be to manage the risk throughout that transition in order to be able to have this idea of dynamic force employment yield the results of putting doubt in the minds of would-be adversaries.
I thank you, sir, and I look forward to your follow-up on those other questions. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. As far as I know, I don't think anyone else seeks time at this point, so we're finished. I don't have anything. Mr. Thornberry, do you have anything for the good of the order?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Allvin, I appreciate that conversation, but I don't think we should pigeonhole current deterrence as presence only. It is decision-making now. Presence can be and forward-based presence has been a fundamental part of our deterrence strategy since the end of World War II. I take your point. You can have different ways to evoke the same result in an adversary's decision-making process, but I don't think it's fair to categorize current deterrence as presence only. I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, that I do appreciate both witnesses being here and trying to answer our questions. I think The bottom line is that, as you and I know, Secretary Esper has been conducting a review of all the combatant commands that has been going on for months. He has kept us abreast of those reviews. What's different is that a couple of staffers in the White House decided that they wanted to try to sell the president on an absolute troop cap for Germany. And if you'll remember, at the beginning, it had a cap on how many American boots could even be on the ground at the same time, which would prevent Germany from being a transit point of our troops into the Middle East or Africa. They clearly hadn't thought through the consequences. They didn't know how it would be implemented. And so what's happened is Secretary Esper and the folks at the Pentagon are trying to put lipstick on the pig, or make lemons out of lemonade, or whatever colloquialism you want to use. There may be some benefit to some of these moves, as I said at the beginning. My concern is, however, the underlying strength and unity of the alliance has not been a foremost consideration. And so all of that, plus the status of the decision-making at the Pentagon, I think has to inform our conference negotiations with the Senate this year, and I presume in years to come. I yield back.
Thank you. I just want to associate myself with, well, I completely agree with what Mr. Thornberry just said. And I do think that what Secretary Esper has done with the bottom-up review, with the command by command, combatant command analysis is a very appropriate thing to be doing. And he is trying to move our defense strategy forward. But I also concur that the coordination between what DOD is doing and what whims come into the heads in the White House has undermined that incredibly important effort. We just had the task force report that came out, led by Sept Moulton and Mr. Banks, sort of outlining, here's the challenge we face. China and, believe it or not, to some degree, Russia have leapt ahead of us on certain key technologies. Technologies that didn't exist, 50 years ago or even 20 years ago in some cases, and we've fallen behind on our ability to meet that threat. So rethinking the way we meet the threats that we face within the Pentagon is enormously important. We can't keep doing things the same way we've done them to date. But that process takes thought, focus, and I think we need to let the DOD do their job and not interfere with that effort. So I certainly agree with that. But I also agree with the point on presence, which I think is very important. I get asked all the time, we're not at war with, why do we have, the Soviet Union broke up. Why do we have troops in Europe? What are they doing there? They are there for a very important purpose. Mr. Thornberry outlined it a little bit, and we've heard it today. I think we need to make clearer to the American public why we have troops deployed in Europe, why we have troops deployed in South Korea, in Okinawa and elsewhere. They serve an incredibly important purpose, and I think we need to make that clear so we can build support for what needs to be done to meet the threats that we face. So I appreciate you gentlemen being here, appreciate this discussion. I think it has been very helpful. And with that, we are adjourned.